ex-brother-in-law claims my house as family property, so I show them his last will and testament. It was a rainy evening, and the house seemed to echo with Jack's absence. Just a week had passed since his funeral, and I was still adjusting to the silence that now filled each room. My heart felt heavy as I moved through the spaces we had once filled together, finding small reminders of him in every corner. Then the loud chime of the doorbell cut through my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and given the storm outside, it seemed unlikely a neighbor would drop by. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and made my way to the door. When I opened it, I felt a strange sense of foreboding. My brother-in-law Paul, his wife Lily, and Grace, Jack's mother, were standing on the porch, soaked but unwavering. Behind them, a small group of family members, cousins, and their children huddled together, each one looking tense and determined. I took a step back, instinctively tightening my grip on the door handle. Paul's eyes narrowed. As he looked past me and into the house, I saw a predatory gleam in his gaze. Without a word, they pushed their way inside, leaving muddy trails on the entryway carpet. Grace didn't spare a glance in my direction as she brushed past me, heading straight for the living room. Her face was set with cold determination. It was as if they'd all rehearsed this moment, like soldiers marching into enemy territory. I felt my pulse quicken as they settled into the living room, making themselves at home, as though they'd always belonged here. Grace finally broke the silence. Her voice was firm and decisive, a quality she'd never displayed before. "We've come to reclaim what's ours," she declared, her gaze unwavering. I forced myself to remain calm, though I was tempted to tell them to leave the house. Instead, I took a deep breath, knowing this was just the beginning of the fight. "What exactly are you reclaiming?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. My tone was steady. Grace's lips twisted into a cold smile as she gestured around the room. She replied, her eyes scanning the walls as if tallying up each piece of furniture. "This house, all Jack's belongings, everything that rightfully belongs to his family." I could feel the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior, but I knew I had to handle this carefully. "This house belongs to me," I replied, my voice unwavering. Jack made sure of that before he passed. My words hung in the air. The air was thick with tension for a moment, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Grace's face. Paul shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a quick glance with his wife Lily. It was clear they hadn't expected me to stand my ground so confidently. Lily, always the first to jump in, scoffed, "Where's the proof?" "I'm sure you're just saying that to keep us out," I replied. I held my ground, reaching for a folder on the nearby table. "You want proof?" I asked. I pulled out the documents Jack had left for me, the official transfer of ownership, signed and notarized. I handed the papers to Grace, who took them reluctantly, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She skimmed the document, her face pale with each line. I watched as she finally looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and resentment. "This can't be," she stammered, but the evidence was right in her hands. Paul stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he snatched the papers from his mother's hands. He read over the documents quickly, his face darkening with each word. "A piece of paper won't keep us out," he hissed, crumpling the document in his fist. "Jack was my brother, and this house is as much mine as it was his." I took a steadying breath, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Jack wanted me to have this house," I replied, meeting his gaze firmly. He knew how much it meant to us. Grace looked between us, her expression hardening once more. It was clear she wasn't thinking straight. She dismissed my words as though they were meaningless. He must have been influenced, maybe even manipulated. The accusation hit me like a slap, but I forced myself to stay calm. Jack knew exactly what he was doing. I responded, he wanted me to have a secure home, knowing I'd be alone. My words seemed to bounce off them like rubber. Their minds were already set on their mission. They weren't going to back down. Grace straightened up, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Well, it looks like we have a will of our own," she said, pulling out a worn piece of paper from her bag and holding it up like a prized trophy, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Jack left everything to us, the house, his savings, everything." I stared at the document in her hand, recognizing Jack's handwriting, but knowing it wasn't the full truth. That will was old, written before we'd even married. I shook my head slowly. "That document is meaningless," I said, "and that it's out of date and has no legal standing." Grace's triumphant expression faltered for a moment, but only then. We'll see about that. You might have some fancy paperwork, but this is family business. Family matters can't be solved by some document. We'll handle this our way. Her tone was icy, and her eyes dared me to challenge her further. I knew there was no reasoning with them. They had come prepared to do whatever it took to make my life a living nightmare. I felt trapped. Despite their relentless insistence, they sat down anyway, spreading out as if claiming their territory. Grace continued to talk, her voice carrying an unsettling confidence. We've already spoken to a few people, and they all agree this house belongs to us, she said, her words laced with venom. I could feel a chill creeping down my spine as she went on. If you refused to leave, well, let's just say things could get very difficult for you. I swallowed hard, feeling the quipe. The weight of their words pressed down on me. They were determined to take over regardless of what Jack had left behind for me. I was firm in my stance. I said I have no intention of leaving. My voice was steadier than I felt. Jack's last wish was for me to live here in peace, but my resolve only seemed to amuse them. Lily leaned forward, her smile cold. She asked, "Do you really think you can stand up to us alone?" She was mocking. She said, "We're family. You're just an outsider." But I didn't show it. I watched them, noting how their confidence grew with each insult they threw my way. They thought I was weak and easily pushed around, but they were wrong. I straightened, lifting my chin defiantly. This house is legally mine, and no amount of bullying will change that. I said, my voice ringing with finality. Paul sneered, exchanging a look with Grace. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Well, we'll just have to see what the courts have to say about it." The threat hung heavy in the air, a reminder that they weren't going to leave without a fight. Grace looked at me, her eyes filled with an unsettling determination. "You've made a grave mistake, Lauren," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet malice. "Jack may have left you this house, but he's gone now, and we're all you have left." Her words struck a nerve, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me, not in my own home. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and unease. Every knock at the door and every unexpected sound sent a jolt of fear through me, knowing they could return at any moment. I spoke to my lawyer, David, who told me that the documents Jack had left were solid and legally binding. Even with that reassurance, though, the threat of their presence lingered. They had made it clear they wouldn't give up so easily, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering when they would strike next. I couldn't sleep. I was haunted by the image of their smug faces and the weight of their words pressing down on me. I tried to focus on my daily routine, hoping to find some semblance of peace, but their shadows hung over every moment. The house, which once felt like a place of comfort, now felt like a battleground, and I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next attack. Finally, the day came when they returned, this time with even more family members in tow. The sight of them crowded on my doorstep filled me with, I felt a sense of dread, but I refused to back down. I opened the door and stood tall, determined not to show any fear. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was steady, and Grace stepped forward with a twisted smile on her lips. "We're here to claim what's ours once and for all," she said, her tone dripping with confidence. Paul and the others pushed their way inside, ignoring my protests as they began to spread out through the house as if already making themselves at home. "You can't just walk in here like this." I tried to protest, but they didn't listen. They moved around the house like they owned it. I was getting really angry, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I lost my temper, they'd have the upper hand. I called David to explain what was going on. He arrived at the house within the hour. He looked serious as he assessed the situation. The family barely noticed him at first. They were too busy taking over my home. When he introduced himself, they finally stopped. I looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "I'm Lauren's attorney," he said. His voice was firm. "I'm here to ensure that her legal rights are respected." Grace scoffed and crossed her arms. "We don't need a lawyer to settle this. It's family business." David remained unfazed. He pulled out the legal documents Jack had prepared. "No, I think you'll find that Jack's wishes were quite clear." She said she didn't care about some piece of paper, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she scanned the documents. David held his ground, making it clear that I wasn't alone in this fight. Tensions grew as David explained the legal situation, making it clear that their so-called will had no legal standing. The family's confidence wavered, but they continued to argue, unwilling to let go of their claims. Paul's voice grew louder, his frustration spilling over as he started shouting at David, his anger turning to desperation. "This isn't over," he growled, his fists clenched. "We'll be back and we'll make sure you regret this." But David remained calm, reminding them that any further harassment would be met with legal consequences. Grace's face twisted in anger, but she finally backed down, motioning for the family to leave. They filed out slowly, casting angry glares in my direction. Their departure was filled with unspoken threats as the door closed behind them. I felt a wave of relief, but I knew this wasn't the end. They would return, and the battle for my home was far from over in the days that followed. I worked closely with David, preparing for any legal action they might take. We reviewed every document and every piece of evidence, determined to protect Jack's final wishes. The family remained silent, but I could feel their presence lingering, a constant reminder that this was a fight I couldn't afford to lose. As the weeks passed, though, I found a new strength. I discovered a newfound resilience within myself. Jack had left me this home as a symbol of our life together, and I was determined to honor that. The family had tried to take it away, but they hadn't counted on my resolve. As I stood in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the memories we had built, I knew that no matter what they tried, I would hold on to this place. Jack's legacy was safe with me, and I was ready to face whatever came next.